I froze mid-bite of my sandwich when my fiancé's mother handed me a faded baby picture and said, "Isn't it wonderful that you two found each other again after all these years?" The photo showed a chubby toddler with a crooked smile sitting on a tricycle. Behind him, barely in frame, was a little girl with pigtails and a purple beret, me. I was 3 years old in that picture. The boy was my fiancé, Caleb. And according to his mother, we'd been next-door neighbors for the first 5 years of our lives before his family moved across the country. I had no memory of him. None. Zero. But that wasn't the problem. The problem was a dead body I'd helped bury when I was 6. Let me back up. I'm Tessa. I'm 29 years old, and I work as a pediatric nurse in Portland, Oregon. My life has been carefully, deliberately normal for the last 2 decades. I live in a small apartment with a rescue cat named Waffle. I water my succulents on Sundays. I go to yoga twice a week. I have a 401k that I actually understand. On paper, I am the picture of stability. That stability started cracking about 14 months ago when I met Caleb at a friend's barbecue. He was tall, lanky in an endearing way, with a gap-toothed smile that made him look like a mischievous golden retriever. He worked as a high school history teacher and coached junior varsity soccer. He remembered everyone's names, brought homemade salsa parties, and cried during Pixar movies. Within 3 months, I was utterly gone for him. 6 months in, he introduced me to his parents, Carol and Dennis. They were warm, retired educators who lived in a craftsman house filled with books and mismatched furniture. Carol hugged me too hard the first time we met and whispered, "You have such kind eyes." I thought I'd hit the jackpot. No drama, no red flags, no secret wives or gambling debts. Just a good man from a good family. We got engaged 9 months after we started dating. Caleb proposed in the rain outside the coffee shop where we'd had our first date, and I said yes before he even finished the sentence. We set a date for the following summer. I ordered a dress. I tasted cake. I made seating charts in my head while lying awake at night, grinning like an idiot. Then came the barbecue at his parents' house last month. Carol had pulled out old photo albums to show me Caleb's awkward teenage years. Braces, a regrettable perm, a phase where he wore only tie-dye. We were laughing over a photo of him crying at his 8th grade graduation when she flipped a page and stopped. "Oh, look at this," she said softly, tracing her finger over a glossy square. "This was right before we moved. You two were inseparable." She handed me the picture, and that's when the floor dropped out. The toddler on the tricycle meant nothing to me, but the little girl with the pigtails? I recognized the beret. It was purple plastic with a daisy in the center. My grandmother had given it to me for my 3rd birthday, and I'd worn it every single day for almost 2 years. I still had it somewhere in a box under my bed. "We lived next door to you," Carol continued, beaming. "On Maple Street, in that little yellow house. Your mom used to bring over zucchini bread every Thursday. You and Caleb would play in the sandbox for hours. Don't you remember?" I shook my head slowly. "I know. I don't." Caleb came up behind me and kissed the top of my head. "That's wild. I barely remember it either. Just flashes. A pink bike. Your dog, what was his name?" "Buster," Carol supplied. "A mutt. Loved to steal socks." I felt cold. Not the kind of cold that comes from a draft, but the deep, bone-level chill of something long buried trying to claw its way to the surface. Because I did remember Maple Street. I remembered the yellow house. I remembered Buster the sock thief. And I remembered the summer I turned 6, when something happened that my mother told me never, ever to speak about again. I excused myself to the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub for 10 minutes, breathing slowly. My hands were shaking. I stared at my reflection and saw a little girl with pigtails and a purple beret standing in the backyard, watching dirt get shoveled over something that should not have been there. When I came back out, I smiled and ate another hamburger and asked to see more photos. Carol showed me pictures of Caleb's first fish, his first lost tooth, his first day of kindergarten. I laughed in all the right places. I kissed Caleb's cheek. I drove us home and made small talk about lesson plans and grocery lists. Then I waited until he fell asleep, and I went into the living room and called my mother. She answered on the second ring, which was unusual because she was a notoriously light sleeper who let calls go to voicemail after 9. It was almost 11. She knew something was wrong before I even said hello. "Mom," I whispered, "why didn't you tell me we lived next to Caleb?" A long pause. Then very quietly, "What did you say?" "Caleb, my fiancé. His family lived next door to us on Maple Street. I was in his baby pictures. You used to make zucchini bread for his mom." Another pause, longer this time. I heard her exhale shakily. "Tessa, listen to me carefully. Do not marry that boy." I almost dropped the phone. "What? Why?" "Do not marry him. And do not tell him anything about that summer. Do you understand me?" "Mom, what are you talking about? What happened that summer?" She started crying. My mother, who I had seen cry exactly twice in my entire life, once at my father's funeral and once when our childhood cat died, was sobbing into the phone like her heart was breaking. "I can't tell you," she said. "I promised. We both promised. But you need to end this engagement, and you need to move as far away from that family as you can." Then she hung up. I sat in the dark for a long time. Waffle jumped into my lap and purred, and I stroked his fur mechanically while my brain spun in circles. What had happened when I was 6? What did my mother promise? Who was we both? The next morning, I called in sick to work. Caleb left for school with a worried frown and a thermos of coffee, kissing me goodbye like everything was normal. The second the door closed, I got in my car and drove to Maple Street. The yellow house was still there. So was a Craftsman next door. Caleb's childhood home, now owned by a young couple with a trampoline in the yard. I parked across the street and just looked at them. They were smaller than I remembered, less magical. The sandbox where Carol said we used to play was now a patch of overgrown grass. I walked around the back of my old house. It had changed hands twice since we moved, and the current owners had put up a privacy fence. But I knew it was back there. A garden shed, a crabapple tree, and a spot near the fence line where the grass never grew quite right, because that was where we'd buried Mr. Whiskers. Mr. Whiskers was the neighbor's cat. He was old, blind in one eye, and mean as a rattlesnake. He'd scratched me more times than I could count. But one afternoon in August, when I was 6 and Caleb was 5, we'd found him lying still in the middle of the backyard, not sleeping, not breathing, dead. I remember crying. I remember Caleb crying harder. I remember my mother coming outside, taking one look at the cat, and then looking over the fence at Caleb's house. His parents weren't home. They'd gone to the city for some appointment. And my mother, who was usually so calm and practical, had gone pale. "We can't tell them," she said. "Why not?" I'd asked. "Because they'll be sad. And because—" She hesitated. "Just trust me. We'll bury him here. It'll be our secret." So we dug a shallow grave near the fence line. I'd said a little kid prayer over the dirt. Caleb had put a handful of dandelions on top. And my mother had made us pinky swear that we would never, ever tell anyone what had happened. I didn't understand why at the time. It was just a dead cat. Old Mr. Whiskers had been sick for months. Everyone knew he was going to die soon. Why was it such a big secret? But standing there on Maple Street, 23 years later, watching a stranger's kids jump on a trampoline, I started to remember other things. Small things. The way Caleb's dad had looked at my mother across the fence sometimes. The way my mother had always made sure to be inside when Carol came over. The whispered arguments I wasn't supposed to hear. The night before we moved away, when my mother had packed our car in the dark and driven 3 hours to my grandmother's house without telling anyone goodbye. I drove back to my apartment with my hands tight on the wheel. I didn't call my mother again. I didn't text Caleb. I just sat on my couch and stared at the wall until he came home from work. "Hey, babe," he said, dropping his bag by the door. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I almost laughed. A ghost? Yes! That was exactly what I'd seen. The ghost of a dead cat and a secret I'd buried so deep I'd forgotten it existed. "Caleb," I said carefully, "do you remember a cat named Mr. Whiskers?" He froze. His face didn't change exactly, but something behind his eyes went very still. "Why are you asking about that?" "Because I think my mother is hiding something, and I think you know what it is." He sat down across from me slowly, like an old man lowering himself into a bath. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then he ran his hands over his face and said, "I was 5 years old, Tessa. I didn't understand what was happening." "What was happening?" "My dad," he said, he wasn't a good person back then. He had a temper. And he and your mom," he stopped, swallowed. "They were having an affair." I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. "What?" "It started that summer. My mom found out a few weeks before we moved. There was a huge fight. I heard things I shouldn't have heard. And then your mom told my dad she was ending it. And my dad got drunk and drove his car into the side of your house." I remembered that. I remembered waking up to a crash and the sound of breaking glass. My mother had told me a tree branch had fallen, but there were no trees near my bedroom. "He didn't hurt anyone," Caleb continued quickly. "It was stupid and scary, but no one was hurt. But your mom was terrified. She packed up and left the next week. My parents almost got divorced. They went to counseling. My dad got sober. He's been clean for over 20 years now. And the cat," I whispered. Caleb looked at his hands. "My dad killed it. He was so angry that night, and Mr. Whiskers was yowling outside, and he kicked it hard, and it died. Your mom saw it happen. That's why she made us bury it in secret. She was protecting my dad, protecting all of us." I stood up. My legs were shaking. "You've known this whole time?" "I didn't remember until I saw you at that barbecue last year," he said. "Something about your smile triggered it, and then I started putting pieces together. I asked my mom about it, and she told me everything. Tessa, I swear I didn't know when we first started dating. But once I found out, I didn't care. It had nothing to do with us." "Nothing to do with us?" My voice came out louder than I intended. "Your father had an affair with my mother and killed a cat and drove a car into my house. And you didn't think that was relevant information to share before you put a ring on my finger?" He stood up too, reaching for me. I stepped back. "I was going to tell you. I was trying to find the right time." "The right time?" I laughed bitterly. "The right time was the first date, or the second, or literally any moment in the last 14 months. "I was scared," he said. "I knew you'd look at me differently. I knew you might leave." You were right. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Caleb's face crumpled. Tears spilled down his cheeks. And I felt something inside me crack. Not break, but crack in a way that could never be fully repaired. "I love you," he said. "I love you more than anything. Please don't do this." I thought about the life we'd planned. The house with the garden. The 2 kids and the golden retriever. The quiet Sundays and the loud Christmases. I thought about how safe he made me feel, how seen, how loved. And then I thought about my mother's voice on the phone, shaking with fear I'd never heard before. "Do not marry that boy." "I'm sorry, Caleb," I said. "I can't." I took off the ring and set it on the coffee table. Then I walked into the bedroom, packed a bag, and called my friend Maya to come pick me up. Caleb didn't follow me. He just stood in the living room, crying silently while I walked out the door. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, I've moved into a short-term rental across town. My mother finally told me the rest of the story. The affair had been going on for 2 years, not just that summer. Carol had known and had chosen to forgive Dennis, but only after my mother agreed to disappear completely. No forwarding address, no contact, no explanations. My mother had kept that promise for 23 years. She built a new life, remarried a wonderful man who passed away 5 years ago, and never once looked back. She'd hoped I would never find out. She'd hoped the past would stay buried, just like Mr. Whiskers. Caleb has called me 47 times. I've counted. He's left voicemails apologizing, begging, explaining. The last one said he'd told his parents we broke up, and they were devastated, but they understood. He said he still loves me. He said he'll wait. I don't know what to do with that. Part of me still loves him too. He didn't choose his father's sins. He didn't ask to be born into a web of secrets and shame. But he did choose to lie to me for over a year. He chose to propose without clearing the air. He chose to let me fall in love with him while standing on ground that was never solid. Last night, I drove past the yellow house again. The new owners had put up a bird feeder near the fence line. The grass had finally grown back over Mr. Whisker's grave, thick and green. I sat in my car for an hour, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink, and I thought about the little girl with the purple beret. She deserved to know the truth. So, did I? I'm not going back to Caleb. I've made that decision, and it hurts more than I can put into words, but it's the right one. Trust, once broken, doesn't just heal because you want it to, and a foundation built on secrets will always be unstable. My mother and I are talking again. She's flying out next week to see me for the first time in 2 years. We're going to sit in my little rental and drink tea and finally tell each other everything. No more secrets. No more buried things. As for the ring, I mailed it back to Caleb yesterday in a padded envelope. No note, no explanation. He already knows why. Some ghosts aren't meant to be dug up, but some secrets, the ones that shape who we become, deserve to see the light.